Dr. Robb Kelly, welcome to Shrink Wrap Radio.
Thank you, David. Great to be here. Thanks very much.
Well, it's really great to have you. We're going to be discussing your book, Daddy, Daddy, Please Stop Drinking, and your unique approach to treating alcohol addiction. And having mentioned your book, I have to say, uh, what a great job you did on that book. I mean, it's very compelling. Often I'm not able to read very much of the books of the people that I'm interviewing, but was really drawn into your book, and in some ways, as painful as parts of it are, or maybe even because as painful as parts of it are, very compelling and almost like reading a novel in places. So I want all of our listeners and viewers to know that and really encourage them to get your book.
Thank you so
So,
much.
so let's jump into your story, and I have to say it's a very complex story.
Mm,
It is a real roller coaster of a ride, uh, and with lots of really high ups and really
yes,
low downs.
yes,
And
yes.
you describe yourself as somebody who doesn't have a medium setting. That kind of stuck with me, that it's either you're full bore,
Yes.
whatever it is,
Yes.
up, or full bore negative. So,
Yeah.
so let's jump into your story. Where did you grow up, and in what sort of family?
I grew up in Manchester, in United Kingdom. I now live in San Antonio, Texas, just to be sure about that one. But I grew up in Manchester. A lower working class family is what I grew into. My dad used to dig the roads for the gas company and repair the big gas mains going down the streets. It was a good job, but it was a working class job, which is fine. And my mum cleaned other people's houses, which again was fine. So we didn't really have a lot of money around. So I was always the kid that never went on school trips because mum couldn't afford it. I was always the kid with no briefcase or satchel because the parents couldn't afford it. So we definitely was paycheck to paycheck. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah,
And we definitely was, that family that was hand downs from, me to my brother and so on and so forth. So, but it was lots of love in that house, David, and a lot of things happened. But we were told categorically from an early age to lie. We were taught how to lie, and as in my mum was very embarrassed where she lived. So, if somebody was to call like a salesman, we had a notepad at the side of the phone, and we would to give this other address, which was from the posh area of town. And I always remember that sticking in my mind that then I become the enmeshment of that situation. I become embarrassed about where we lived. So I'd made sure that one day we used to go playing football, and one of the kids, her friends at school, said, "Hey, Rob, my dad's going to pick us all up tonight, make it nice and easy instead of getting the bus." And I was horrified, David. In fact, I give the same address, the posh address. I had to run there 30 minutes before and wait outside this house because they come from a posh family to pick me up in the car and then go and play soccer. We come back again. He dropped me off. I would be waving like a crazy kid, bye, bye,
yeah,
hoping they would drive off. And
right.
then when they finally drove off, I ran back home to the house. So I
I
also
can
remember that
really
memory.
identify with that story. Um, there were times when I remember hiding. We were hiding from the bill collector, and
Mm,
would have to duck down beneath the window with my mother and laying on the floor. And also in high school, the unexpected visit of some friends who wanted to pick me up, and we'd all go to the beach. And and I went through that same sort of feeling of shock and shame and so on. So I can really identify what you're describing. And in your early school years, I think you carried with you some of that trauma, and you were a slight kid, um, and sometimes a victim of bullying,
mm,
and um, and kind of a shy kid in
mm.
contrast with how you are now.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. And I think that was the learned behavior from parents. They sort of hid in the background. They were great people, and I carried that through. So the bullying took a toll on me. It really did. But, and I say this with a capital B, I have the alcoholic mind. So I wasn't, there's always a solution for a problem. That's what our trials and tests and scientific research has proven. So I got my mom and dad somehow to pay 20 cents a week so I could go and learn karate and then boxing to make sure that I never got bullied again. And that seems to be my whole life, is doing the unexpected far more than people would give me credit for. It
Right.
always amazes me today, but that come from that. So I'd walk into school, especially when I did the bodybuilding, and people go, "Oh my goodness, Robb's here. Oh, don't mess with him." And I would honestly look around in the early days going, "Who are they talking about?" Because I had this massive body with still the mind of that scared child.
Sure,
And
sure.
it was very confusing. There was nobody there in my family or doctors or therapists back then that could say to me, "Hey, here's what's happening to you, Rob." So it was quite discerning for a long while.
Yeah. Yeah, it was, you, actually, you in the I don't know, maybe it was in middle school or high school where you began to really you were also a musician. Your family got you into a family band, and you learned to play the guitar. I even see a guitar behind you there,
Yes.
electric
Yes.
guitar, and you had quite a bit of success as a musician in this
Mm,
very complex life of yours. So scary part, and I identify with the wanting to learn martial arts. I
mm.
also went into martial arts in high school, uh, hoping to be like in the cartoons, the little guy who could throw the big guy over his shoulder or do something magical like that. Uh, so totally understand that impulse, but with your alcoholic predilections, you took it pretty far, and it was scary even to read that you developed a rather massive body, and and
Yeah.
even got into steroids, and
Yes.
so had some degree, it sounds like, of what they call roid rage,
Yes.
and even began to work as a bouncer and became something of a thug,
Yes.
working for a Manchester thug of some note,
Yes.
and narrowly avoided prison. There was actually a very uh, serious crime committed by your group or your gang that the luck of the grace of God somehow that you stepped back just enough to miss that.
It's it's really weird because people say when I go on the show they read the book, and I've never read the book. I give pieces to my wife, and she kind of built this book. But oh my goodness, yes, I remember that. I so remember that. And yeah, I should be in jail. I should have got life inside probably by now because I was out of control. And the only thing that stopped me was going away to university, which again I shouldn't have gone to, by rights, but I have ways and means, and I'm very clever when it comes to manipulating people and places and situations around me. But I think if I would have stayed in the same house on uh, that's a couple of blocks, we call it an estate of about 6,000 houses, because that's the time when heroin started to hit really bad, and crack cocaine, and all my friends are dead because of heroin overdoses. So I think I scraped through that. I scraped through by God's grace, not being involved in the armed robbery, and everyone went to prison for some unknown reason. It seems like God, and if you don't believe in God, guys, universe, Uncle John, whatever you believe in, but God kept me away because I truly believe that He had a plan for me. Because my life doesn't make sense. How can
No,
someone
it's
from the projects go to an esteemed? I mean, that doesn't
oh,
happen.
you got into Oxford against all
Yes,
expectations,
yes,
Oxford University, and so you were born with a brain that was a real mixed bag
yes,
of, on the one hand, this terrible addiction, and on the other hand, incredible native intelligence,
yes.
and smart enough to get into Oxford, very prestigious place, and even to eventually get a PhD in
Mm,
psychology there,
mm.
which
Yes, it
is
was,
just,
but I have to put this out, and I try and all the time as a disclaimer, is my friend's dad around 14, 15 was a Freemason. And Freemason in England is very, very secretive, not like it is over here where the signs on buildings. It's a very secretive. So one day he asked me to go down. He was looking for an organ player for a year, special occasion. And I was 15, 16, and they asked me to go in and play. So I played, but before I could go into the lodge and play, they had to make me a Freemason of something. So I that's how I got into the opportunity to go to Oxford. It was a friend of a friend, because I'd done him this huge favor or something playing the
yeah.
organ. But yeah, it was yeah,
It,
I got in there, but I excelled when I'm putting into certain situations. I excel, and I'm usually one at the back of the class going, Robert, will you just take notice, please? Because and I've done a lot of studying around that, and I've done a lot of research around that, and I know fully what it is today. And I truly believe that the alcoholic brain is different to the normal brain.
yeah.
And when we are put into situations and circumstances where our alcohol disappears, or we take a different path, we exceed like crazy. I often tell friends of mine, if you take me to the local knee surgeon and you put me in there with no medical experience, let me watch him for 10 days, I could do that operation. And people freak out. No, I could. I literally could, because I have to see something to do it. I can't. I'm not great studying something in
And,
literature.
uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. And the other amazing thing is that, your alcoholism progressed from age 9,
Mhm.
which is amazing. What was the initial impact, say at age 9? Did it feel good? Did you feel anything in your body or brain? Did it feel like something locked in,
Oh
or
yes.
did it take time to develop that?
Immediately. I often ask alcoholics that I work with, do you remember your first drink? Go, yeah, I was 4. And normal people don't do that, by the way, guys. But yeah, I remember I was stood on stage playing with my musical family, auntie and uncle. I was the bass player, and we played a first set, and there was hundreds of people there, and I was so nervous as a child. And when I came off, I started crying and says, I can't go back on. I can't go back on. And my uncle gave me this gold looking liquid, and I drank it down, and my whole world changed right there and then. I knew that this is the stuff that's going to make me a champion. And I went back on for the second half of that show, and I think was absolutely, I felt amazing. I felt like a good bass player. I felt like a superstar. And
Yeah.
they did that to me for a long time.
Yeah. So it was, in one way, it got you through because it gave you what's called Dutch courage,
Yes.
to overcome the inner frightened child who was ashamed, embarrassed, feeling inadequate, and all of that. And you could really come out with this
Mm,
Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde,
mm.
this other personality that was confident and very competent and successful. As a matter of fact, I seem to recall that Oxford's not an inexpensive place, and that you
Oh,
were
wow.
you were
Yeah.
able to pay your way through from the money you were making as a musician.
I did. Again, I've always wanted to be a musician, as you know, since the early ages of about 4 or 5, when my uncle used to come home and he would playing songs all week, preparing for the weekend's gigs. And I just loved the guitar, the way, oh, it was just amazing. So I knew somewhere I was going to be a musician, hopefully professional in a band, which we tried many times. But I got into session work. I mean, we would load a van at 4 o'clock in the afternoon with all this equipment. We'd drive 4 hours, we'd play the gig, we'd get minimal money, we'd stack the bag, we'd come out, and we'd come out with, I can't remember the money, but let's say it was £10, £20 each. Somebody invited me to a studio to say, can you do a track for me? And I'm like, okay. So I went down. It was actually a 10cc studio just outside Manchester called Strawberry Studios. And I went in and I did what looked like or sounded like 30 minutes, if that. They put a script in front, bam, 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 bam. I'd do the score, pass it back to them. I walked out and they gave me £65 or something. And all of a sudden, an alcoholic brain again. Oh my God, why am I doing all that work for minimum money when I can sit in the studio, nice, warm, you know, a nice Coca-Cola or beer and play this and get 5 or 6 times the money. So that kind of kicked off drinking pretty regularly. Decided to uh, to look at this magazine once. Well, and in the magazine, I think it was Melody Maker, was an advertisement for the bass player Abbey Road to play with bands that didn't have the bass player, and I applied for it. And 7 auditions later, I got the job. But it's
Yeah,
funny, Dave, I don't know whether you remember, but in the book, but when I went to the first one, I was so scared that I had a beer outside the first one, went home, waited for the mail to come, opened it, got a second one. So obviously I have 2 beers when the second audition. By the time I got the 7th one, I had 7 beers before I went in. I don't really remember going in. I don't remember the session. I got home and I thought, I've blew it. And a week later, the letter come to say I got the position. So what does that tell me, the alcoholic? That when you drink, amazing things happen.
uh-huh. Yeah. And indeed they were happening. I can understand making that connection. So your disease, and you do identify with the disease model, was progressive, and the alcohol and steroids and so on. Well, thankfully, not cocaine, I gather, and not heroin. Somehow you missed some of those heavier drugs.
I missed the heroin, but I did take the cocaine.
You did.
Yes, I did,
And so,
unfortunately.
this addiction was progressing to the point where by the time you were in college, at university, you were pretty much a full-on addict. And you described different levels of addiction or different kinds of addicts. I don't remember the distinctions. Take us through that.
Well, I've obviously learned this through studying in neuroscience, which is what I specialize in, only on addiction now, not generally. Is the progressive illness obviously gets worse and worse and worse. It never gets any better. And the only way to describe that in layman's terms, guys, if you're watching, this will be amazing. If you're listening, I'll do my best. Is what happens is the neural pathways, and there are billions in the head. So the neural pathways are learning, you know, a thought pattern. The basal ganglia spins it around, repetition, strengthen, confirms anything, i.e. a pilot needs 10,000 hours in the air before he can fly a commercial jet. So neural pathways are built. Let's ride a car, drive a bike. So let's say this neural pathway, which I have a brilliant video, is for driving a car. So we get into it, feels very big. After a week, it's better. And then after a couple of months, boom, we can pass our test and away we go. But when I go to a foreign country for a couple of years in a right-hand vehicle driving on the left-hand side of the road, what happens is neural pathways, it diminishes. Okay. So when I come back in 2 years' time, I can't just jump in the car and take off. It takes me a few minutes to reconnect that neural pathway again. That makes sense. We all do that with stuff. Now, with the alcoholic, what we found, and the reason why it's a progressive illness, is this self-sabotaging set of neural pathways start off until I'm full-blown alcoholic. But if I go into treatment or try and come off it for a week, a month, a year, that self-sabotaging thought pattern neural pathway does not diminish like the driving car one did. It stays there. And that's why many people say after a year's sobriety, they go straight back to where they left off, because the self-harming neural pathways, self-sabotaging, is waiting for you and it kicks off again. So that's why, and the hypothalamus, of course, which tells us to drink after we cross over from abusing to alcoholically, it's a predisposition, guys. You can't drink yourself to becoming an alcoholic. I want to put that out there. So yeah, definitely disease, definitely progressive. And in my experience with our 30 years under our belt, we think it's the #1 killer, alcohol and drugs. It's not getting reported though, unfortunately. There's not true reports when people pass away. It goes down as liver failure, it goes down as car crash, or it goes down as many other things.
Yeah.
But alcohol is damaging more people than you think, guys out there. Believe me.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing I learned from your book, you clarify the term blackout, and I always assumed that a blackout meant that you passed out, and we know that people sometimes do pass out from drinking, but you describe it in different terms. I'll let you do that.
Yeah, I thought the same, David, when I first came around. But blackout it happens with alcoholics only and heavy drinkers, abusers. If you drink a little bit too much, you won't remember. But what happens is you are very functional during that blackout. So you don't pass out and you don't go unconscious. What happens is you continue drinking and you go around, usually nighttime, doing your stuff. And you may do some crazy things or upset somebody or get into an argument. You come back home, you don't remember going to bed. And next morning you got up and the same thing happened. You go, oh my God, what did I do last night? And then you found out you're doing horrible things. And it's kind of the brain shutting off. You're going, okay,
Yeah.
we're intoxicated level now. There's nothing we can do, but we on and on and on. And that's a blackout. Most people have a blackout once a night, say a night a week or a night a month. I had blackouts for several weeks at a time because I would continually drink because I didn't like hangovers. And the only way not to get a hangover, well, there's two ways not to drink, and that wasn't going to happen, or to keep drinking. So for several months, if not years, I was constantly intoxicated at different levels.
Yeah. Yeah. I learned in my college years, I guess, that I didn't like hangovers either. And fortunately, I didn't have that brain chemistry or genetics that set me up. You know, I was able to say, whoa, this is horrible. I'm not going to do this anymore. And, you know, and I'm somebody who can drink a drink or two occasionally. Long periods of time go by where I don't have any kind of alcohol. We have alcohol in our home, bottles of wine and so on, vodka, and some of it is untouched for years. It's so it's a very different story, and
Yes.
because I was blessed not to have that the brain or genetic disposition to be pulled in that direction. And so, but your experience was you were almost in a kind of fugue state where you didn't know what you were doing, and it turned out that, you know, we haven't talked about your relationships with girls progressing to women, which you had a lot of very mixed experiences
Yes.
again,
Yes.
but culminating in a horrible situation um, where in one of these blackout states you assaulted your wife, you stabbed her. Uh, the authorities were called. They took you had two daughters at that point, and they declared you to be an unfit parent. And that was really a big bottom. And you would think with that bottom, that would be the end of it.
You would
But
think so. To the normal person, oh my goodness, how can you do? No, not me, unfortunately. After all that happened, I continued drinking. I fled to Spain until charges were dropped. She was only in hospital for 2 or 3 days. There were stitches, but there was no serious harm. But she was first pushing for attempted murder, manslaughter. But that was dropped in the end. And back in the day in England, if the person dropped the assault charges, then they couldn't take it to court. Whereas over here, if somebody comes to a house, somebody's going to court over domestic violence. So I came back from Spain, and that's when she took the kids. I got them back for a night. I was intoxicated for a couple of days with them, and then they took them off me. So yes, you would have thought, but I went back in the kitchen and started drinking again. And that's what my eldest daughter, age 3, said to me 3 things when the authorities and mom and mother-in-law and child services took them off me. And she said 3 things when she walked down the pathway towards the gate. And they were, Daddy, please don't go. After I've left them for 2 days with no food or diapers changed. And then halfway down, she turned again. I'm crying. The policeman's crying. It was just a horrible, sad state of affairs. And she turned around one more time. He says, Daddy, please get better. And as they got to this big iron gate, they opened it. And she turned around one more time and looked at me and said, Daddy, please stop drinking. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it for my children. I couldn't do it for my parents, my wife, my friends. I couldn't even do it for me because I was in full-blown alcoholism where my hypothalamus is telling me to drink alcohol when it tells other people to drink water and eat food to survive. This is very important when it comes to alcoholism. It tells me to drink alcohol. So from there, We went to my parents. The house was taken over. She took over the house, all foreclosed. I can't remember. And from my parents to friends, from friends to acquaintances. And in the matter of about 2 and 3 weeks, I'm homeless. I have lost everything. Nobody wants to talk to me. When I try and phone home, they put the phone down, and I'm stuck in the center of Manchester on a bench for the first night going, where the hell did that just go wrong?
And you had lots of money at that point,
Yes.
right? You had
Yes.
actually had started a telecom company.
Yes.
And so it wasn't just the music, you were also making really good money as a businessman. And here you are now homeless.
Mm.
And later in the book, you come to realize that that you suffer from PTSD, and you write very movingly about the trauma of being, and I live in a fear of this. I mean, I've never been homeless, but I have to say it's in the back of my mind, you know, that, whoa, this could happen to me, because we see so many homeless people on the street these days. How traumatic it is to be homeless, to not have a home, to not have resources, to not have money. Yeah. So
I don't think people realize when they hear that story, or anybody who's suffering terrible that ends up on the streets, it's the psychological effect of abandonment is the worst thing in the world, and the helplessness, and there's nobody to turn to, and nobody's protecting you, and nobody can speak up for you. You're just there on a daily basis trying to survive. And if that's bad enough, I mean, everybody has a home, everybody has family to a certain degree, and everyone has someone they can go to. I had nobody, and these guys around me. And David, I met scientists, I met doctors, I met engineers that are living on the streets because they went through some bad luck or got into alcoholism and couldn't get out of it. So it was a very lonely time, and I was on there for over a year, you know, living on the
wow.
streets. And if I
Yeah.
was to be real honest, David, I have to say that after about 8 or 9 months, I got very comfortable on them streets, and that scared me.
Yeah, I've heard that people who try to intervene in homelessness, that's one of the issues that they deal with, is that the people would rather be in on the streets than in the kind of shelter that might be provided for them.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. So later on, your wife divorces you, and time goes by, and you begin to kind of have the feeling, you fool yourself. You talk about how the alcoholic brain will feed them unrealistic messages, and you begin to cotton to the idea of, I need to get married again, and that'll straighten me up.
Yes. What crazy thinking is that all about? But that didn't work, by the way.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know. It was just, I have to say, and that's just a brief summary, that if I had to do it all over again, I'd do exactly the same, because what I realized, you see, when I was suffering from alcoholism, nobody really knew anything about it. So my doctor, who alcoholism is the only self-diagnosed illness in the world. Nobody can diagnose you. 10 DUIs do not make you an alcoholic. There's a fine line between abusing alcohol and in that slim pocket that says you're an alcoholic. And I went to the doctor, go to them 12-step meetings, and go to self-help groups, and nobody knew. So when I was on the streets, it intrigued me that nobody had an answer, because I'd been into the Priory, which is the most expensive treatment center in Britain, and they did nothing. I drank on the way home. So I had this time thinking on the streets is, why can't I stop? Why have I damaged my family? Why do I want to kill myself on a daily basis? Because I tried suicide 6 or 7 times, and on 2 or 3 occasions it worked and my heart stopped. Why was I doing this? And then one morning I was stood outside of a liquor store. It was 5, 6, I can't remember what time it was, very early hours, in a vest, a pair of shorts, and a pair of flip-flops. and it was snowing and I was sweating profusely and I was shaking and I had a headache and I felt horrible, which meant from my experience that I'm going into the DTs. So if I don't get alcohol in my body within at least 45 minutes, I'm going to end up in hospital. The guy sees me. He knows I'm an alcoholic. He sneaks me in one morning, closes the door behind because he's not supposed to sell alcohol until 10 p.m. And now it's about 6 a.m. And I remember this day, and this was the game changer for me, is I was shaking. I could hardly hold the 10 pounds in my hands. I put it on the counter and he put the bottle on the counter and I grabbed the handle of the bottle and this was my reaction. My sweating stopped, my headache went away, the shivers and the shaking stopped, and automatically I was in a great mood. I'd not even opened the cap. I looked at the alcohol, I looked at the shopkeeper, I looked back at the alcohol, and I thought, darn it, it's not the alcohol. And that set off my studying. And I promised to myself and God, if I ever got off the streets, I'll spend the rest of my life studying, absolutely intense studying around the brain and alcoholism, especially. I also work on addiction and trauma, but I was intrigued by them in the early days.
You also, in your efforts to get free of your alcoholism, you describe relapsing, frequent relapses. Talk to us about that. Why is it that people relapse?
Well, there's a certain amount of things you need to know as being an alcoholic, and that is that the mind left alone to its own entity will drive alcoholics to drink every time. So we need a strict routine. We definitely need a spiritual experience or contact. There's no doubt about that. And we need to change the way I think. And then we call it a psychic change, psychic of the mind change. So we need to change the neural pathways. What happens if we don't? Obviously, the hypothalamus comes in and the basal ganglia, and all of a sudden we find ourselves drinking. So here's the important part and the mystery part. If you ask an alcoholic, why did you relapse? He can give you 1,000 excuses, but not one reason. And the reason he can't do that, it's beyond my capability, my mental capability and capacity to not drink when that thought pattern comes to drink. So what we did then is we looked at an alcoholic, we followed several around with their permission, we paid them, and each one of them relapsed. They were chronic relapses. And then we'd monitor them to the store, buy the alcohol, drink the alcohol. We did all that. Now, the most intoxicating part of that whole scenario was the drive to the liquor store. So it automatically tells you that this is not a choice. Alcoholism. Now, abusing is, don't get me wrong, and you won't be able to tell the difference if you don't have any training, but the alcoholic has no choice whether he drinks or not, unless the aforementioned things need to happen. He will relapse because it's beyond our control.
Yeah. Now, somehow, and you went through, posh treatment center and other kinds of rehab situations. And at some point, you succeeded. And normally, I think when people go to AA, they say, my name is Robb Kelly, and I'm a recovering alcoholic. But the conclusion of your book, you say, my name is Robb Kelly, and I'm a recovered alcoholic. I don't know if anybody ever goes to a AA meeting. I mean, I think AA is skeptical of the idea of full recovery.
Well, there are parts that are, I believe, and there's a great big, I call a big book in the 12-step rooms, and that is a book that is far more advanced than it is. Talks about neuroscience and stuff like that. So I always explain something that I don't drink alcohol today, so I don't have the mental obsession, and because I don't drink alcohol, my body doesn't crave for it. So the mental capacity is gone. So therefore, I've recovered from alcoholism. Now I've not recovered from the traits, and I'm not cured, because if I stop doing what I need to do, I'm going to relapse again. But the definition in the Oxford English is where the big book got their words from, the guys that wrote that, is to gain one's health and state of mind. That's all recovered means. So there's no cure for alcoholism, but there's no cure for food poisoning or the common cold. But when I had food poisoning, my doctor said, here's the pills, here, drink lots of water. Let me give you a few steps to make sure you don't get food poisoning. I've never had food poisoning since. So I've recovered from that food poisoning. I've recovered from alcoholism, but I'll still be an alcoholic because I have the mind that take me to all sorts of different traits and self-sabotage. So big statement here. Alcohol, and we can back this up, we back everything I've set up, has 1% to do with alcoholism. I never had a drinking problem, David. I had a thinking problem. That was my deal. Once the mind and the brain, two different entities, are sorted out, and with treatment that really works, alcohol diminishes and becomes de minimis as a whole. And then we become absolutely amazing human beings. All my staff are recovered alcoholics and addicts. And we just go on to live life as we should live life, because we're the only people that get two lives in one lifetime. We get the first one, and if we're lucky to get through that, God's grace, then we have this second one. So, why shouldn't we laugh? We have recovered, and I love that word. And many people get hot under the collar every time I say it. But when I explain about the food poisoning and the common cold, it does make sense to them, which is awesome.
Well, what do you do that's different than other recovery programs? You run a recovery program there in Texas. What is it that other programs don't understand about alcoholism?
They will concentrate on the alcohol. Let's just stop you drinking. That's got nothing to do with the disease as a whole. So we use neuroscience a lot. We use neuro-linguistic program known as NLP. We use brain spotting, and we use common psychology for the program. And the brain spotting, not a lot of people will know this, but the eyes are an extension of the brain. They're actually an extension, the part of the brain. They're not separate. It's not connected by the optical nerve, as many people think. If you run it on Google, you'll be amazed to find out. So by looking into the eyes with brain spotting, you can actually go straight into the subconscious brain and pull that trauma out. So this is about trauma. Trauma is the gateway drug. End of story. And especially if you're born with the predisposition, as soon as you take alcohol, because you will eventually, unless you're guided away from it at a very early age, then you will fall under that category, which means you're on a ticking time clock before you die. So we don't concentrate on the alcohol. We concentrate on neuroscience, the brain, the central nervous system, the trauma. We will go to any length to make sure that you recover from this. And if you need, a hand up, we will pay for different things for you to give you a hand up. We believe in you. We change, we remap brains. 10 years ago, the medical fraternity found out, and I'm sure David, is neuroplasticity, that you can remold the brain. And that's what we do. And we're very successful. So when I do the studying around treatment centers, and there are some amazing treatment centers, David, as me and but when I do the average research, it's around 5 to 10% success rate. Well, we're sitting at 97%. In fact, we're the only company in the world that offer a money-back guarantee should you relapse while following our program after you've left, up to 5 years. So we are definitely different. We're definitely passionate. You have a 4-man team around you at any time, 24 hours a day, and I only take on 4 patients at any one time. So he's kind of a concierge, knowledgeable neuroscience approach to alcoholism.
Yeah. Speaking of neuroscience, I want to quote one sentence that you hear that's leaped out at me. I estimate from my experience in working with alcoholics and research that there are about 7.3 seconds once the conscious brain thinks about drinking for a person to decide to take corrective action. And so that made me wonder if you're familiar with the work of Bruce Ecker on memory reconsolidation.
I am, yes.
Yeah,
definitely. And that 7.3 seconds is an average, obviously, anything from 4 to 10. So we had to put a number on it when we were doing our research. So we just called it 7.3 because 7's my lucky number and 3 was my daughter's lucky number. It's 7.3. It's around there. But you can literally change your mindset within that time. So if you are going to self-sabotage, do something silly or made a bad mistake, what we do, and it's really easy, is we get a rubber band on our non-dominant hand and we snap that whenever it is, and that will redivert the neural pathways, but it has to be done. And the other thing that we use it for is if you are going to do anything, like, oh God, I must wash the dishes, or, I must go and do the lawn, that 7.3 seconds also applies, because once you get out of that 7.3 seconds time frame, I'll do it tomorrow. You never do it if you don't make, you know, a motion to get there. So if you're going to the gym, you know, get up, get your bag out, put the sneakers in and put them by the door in the first 7.3 seconds. And your success will start coming. Then the reward system in the brain. So we need 4 chemicals in the brain, especially the alcoholic, to make them happy. We need the endorphins, get to the gym, work out for 20 minutes. We need the dopamine, the reward system, compliment 3 people every day. Your dopamine's released into your brain. The serotonin is a social belonging. So we've got some backfire from the disease that was flying around. So social belonging and sunlight. And of course, we have oxytocin, which is the cuddling hormone. But if you don't, and I say don't, get out for that serotonin, then you will become depressed. And what normally happens when you get depressed is you go to the doctor and they'll give you an SSR. So you take the SSR and you get back to normal. My question has always been to the medical fraternity is why is our serotonin low in the first place? Because we're not doing what we're supposed to do as human beings. Most of us work from home these days. Most of us don't socialize. You've only got to look at our research on death row, which states that, and you'll probably get this, David, because of the book you wrote on serial killers, which I love, by the way. The Zodiac. This is the Zodiac.
Oh, thank you.
Is that let me stop there for a second. Remind me I'm on death row. But the book is amazing. I've studied you for years. I've read you for years, and I just absolutely adore the wonderful and huge effect you've had on the psychology industry as a whole. I just think you have a genius mind. I really do. And some of the stuff that I read and I watch and I see and I hear about you has made me the person I am today. It really has.
Wow.
So that led me into the research. I would have loved to go on you know, the psychological test from the serial killers. I wasn't so lucky, but it turns out that probably 6 or 7 out of 10 people that actually get to the chair for the execution or the needle are partially insane. That's because of the isolation. So we isolate as a generation now. Most of the time, we don't get that social contact. So that's where many people are falling sick and falling ill. Is I don't think, and I don't know whether you agree with this, David, that we haven't seen the full fallout from COVID yet.
I agree.
All the
I've
isolation.
been concerned about that, and bringing that up in lots of my interviews and asking people's take on it. So you've just given me your take on it. We're sort of at the wrap-up phase here. I wonder if there's anything else that you would like to share, or invite you to share your website in case people want to contact you or find out more.
Excellent. So as you know, guys, if you're watching, I spell my name with 2 B's, ROBBKELLY.com is the website. Just put Dr. Robb Kelly into any search engine, you'll find me. Jump on the website. The book is on there. And the only reason I mention it is every single $9 goes back out into the community for one parent families. We give away 150,000. It's like 10,000 from the book, and the rest we give back into the community. So jump on there. And I really want to put this out there because, guys, if you're sat at home and you don't think you're worthy, and if you don't think you're going to amount to anything, and you're just in that headspace, first of all, I want to apologize to you because somebody's put that there. We are born with $1 million minds. Why are you hanging around 10-cent minds? So here's the deal. If you're in that place where it's either suicide or, you know, you give me a call direct on my phone number, 214-600-0210. I'll give you a 10-minute pep talk that will change your life. And if I don't, I'll send you $100. How's that? Just for your time. Because this is about giving back, and this is about being kind to the next human being. And I just wish somebody had done that to me, but I want to be that guy that lends a hand out to you.
Wow, that's an incredible offer. Dr. Robb Kelly, I really want to thank you for being my guest today on Shrink Wrap Radio.
Absolutely. The pleasure was all mine. I get to meet you at last. That's awesome. I love it.
Wonderful for me too.